Okay, so in this video, I want to talk about virtual machines. All of our software, since we use so many different revisions and versions and brands of software, we have to sort of containerize these into maintainable environments so that we can efficiently develop in, say, Wonderware 7, which is very old, or Wonderware 2012 R2, for instance. Those two pieces of software cannot exist on the same machine at once. So varying flavors, varying things, we will use virtual machines to virtualize a development environment, and that will allow us to efficiently work on one customer's project one day and another project the other. So virtual machines are stored under the V drive as in Victor. We should see those there. We can see there's a software development VMs. Now, inside this, there's several different things that we'll go through. The first and most important is the base VMs folder. So if you had a 32-bit virtual machine or needed a 32-bit virtual machine, this would be your starting point. If you need a 64-bit machine, this one would be your starting point. And when I say starting points, we're actually seeding children VMs off of these. And we can actually derive a VM from these. For instance, if we go back and look, we'll have the Allen Bradley V101. Well, this VM, if you notice, is 12 gig. It is actually derived from the parent VM, which is this base VM. So to run that, you actually have to have both. So you would create and extract both those files, and then you could, if you so chose, extract the Allen Bradley VM and make another seed off that. So if we wanted Allen Bradley with Wonderware 2014, we would make a VM for that. It would be a child of the Allen Bradley. But then if we wanted another child, Allen Bradley with Wonderware 2012, we could do that. And so we would then again seed that off of that Allen Bradley, which of course is seeded off of the base VM. So let's see a little bit of what that looks like. If we go to my VMs folder on my hard drive, it's a little messy here, but we can look and we got this VCW7x64. This has both the primary and core VMs in it. The core is just the base Windows install. Primary has some other generic stuff. It is seeded from the core. Then we go into Allen Bradley and we actually have this Allen Bradley VM. And again, it is seeded back from that primary that we just looked at. So this allows us to save a lot of hard disk space, not having to reuse some of those core and fundamental things on every VM. So I'm going to start VMware Workstation. We can see here is my Allen Bradley. We can go look at some settings on him. Now, a few things that we need to make sure that we've got is one is shared folders. I always keep my projects, my things I'm working on my actual machine and not on my virtual machine. So I've got, in my documents, I've got a folder called Projects. I organize my projects by customer and then by site. So if I go into Devon, then I would see some of the sites down here that I work on for Devon. So it's organized similar to the T drive. And so what I've got is when I open a file in this virtual machine, I want it to open it on the actual C drive of my main computer, not from within the virtual machine. That allows me to do things like pause the virtual machine and not have to resume it to make a copy or a backup or see where I've been. If I wanted to work on one file on two different virtual machines, I could do it easily and not have to worry about moving files back and forth. So, share folders, you enable it, and you can actually add a location on your main hard drive. The other thing that we might look at here, and we'll get a little more into this, is the network adapter. I generally keep mine set for bridged mode. Bridged mode essentially means that your network card inside your virtual machine physically exists on the network. It seems like it's on the network. It needs its own IP address. It's not hiding behind some other IP address. As opposed to NAT, which is network address translation, it would share the IP address of your main or host machine. So it would get the same IP address that I have here on my main desktop effectively. We don't generally want to use NAT. Bridged works best, but there are occasions for NAT. A good example of an occasion for NAT might be some customers will only allow one IP address to be present on a port on a switch, or they'll lock it. So if you wanted to run your virtual machine and be able to get on that network, you would need to have only one IP address on that port, and the only way to accomplish that is via NAT. So with that, we'll get in. I'm going to resume this virtual machine. So we see a couple buttons up here. Obviously, you got your pause button here. You could pause it, or you could shut the whole thing off. You could go into full screen mode, which is my preference. They have a Unity mode, which would actually sort of superimpose or overlay the programs running on both your main system and your virtual machine as though it were one desktop. Or you could actually toggle multi-monitor. I'm going to exit Unity here. You could actually toggle a multi-monitor mode and be able to have a virtual machine utilize more than one monitor. So I'm going to go into full screen. So now we are in full screen inside of our virtual environment. If I put my mouse up at the top, I can see my other virtual machines running. Here's my multi-monitor toggle if I wanted it to be 2 monitor or 3 or whatever. A few things we want to look at and think about here is we talked about NAT. So here under removable devices, you can actually go into your network adapter and go into your settings. And at any given time, switch to NAT. We could change it to NAT. Or we could change it to, again, bridged mode. Now, what we see under here, under NAT, we see it's identifying, it's going to get an IP address. And it's got a really funny IP address compared to what it had. And that is because this IP address is a virtual port to the main computer and is not, again, not on the physical network itself. So, important things in NAT is NAT, you have to have your TCP4 has to be set up for obtain automatically or DHCP mode. So we can see that here I'm in DHCP mode. If you have a static IP address, NAT will not work. So I'm going to go back. I'm going to change it back to bridged mode. you'll see the network connection drop, and then it will come back. Again, the adapter is still set for DHCP, so if you happen to be on a network like EMD, you get an IP address. And you can see I've got 4.50 now is assigned to this virtual machine. And so that is then pingable from anywhere on this network and so on, as opposed to it hiding behind that main IP address. So with me having 4.50, what you might also see is on a customer network where they don't have a DHCP server, maybe you have to set a static IP address. And of course that happens here, where we could set up a 10 whatever IP address that we needed. So that's an overview of the networking on NAT and Bridged, but I want to talk real quick also about the virtual network editor. By default, virtual machines will assume connection of this network adapter. So this network adapter will connect to or utilize the physical device on your computer that has internet. What I mean by that is, if you have a Wi-Fi connection, but you're wanting your virtual machine to use your LAN port instead of trying to hop on your Wi-Fi network, if you want to use your LAN port to connect to your PLC, well then you may have an issue. So how you get around that is under the virtual network editor. In the virtual network editor, we can see on bridged mode, we can apply these same things, by the way, to each mode, but on bridge mode, it's saying always make sure that either it's automatic, or maybe make sure that it's only ever routing through the wireless, maybe, or maybe I always wanted to route through my LAN connection, which is most of the time what I want. So you can force it to use the physical connection that you want right here instead of having it automatically switch. It's a common thing when you're trying to connect to a PLC and you can't seem to ping it, but you can ping it from your main computer. You can't ping it from your virtual machine. It could be that it is trying to ping through your Wi-Fi or something along those lines. So that's another great gotcha to remember on virtual machines. I want to also show real quick, we talked about shared folders. We can see I have a shared folder down here. This is that project folder we talked about a moment ago. When you define under your settings, when you define a link or a path to a shared folder, so here we can see that that goes to that location on my physical machine. So with that, I then can map a drive. So if I go to Tools and I go to Map Drive and I can hit Browse, I'll see VMware Host, and underneath that will be all the shared folders. So if I have more than one shared folder, I can see it here. Or I just check at whatever level I want to share it with, projects, for instance, hit OK, and then boom, it will be mapped. And here I have it mapped as my Z drive. So that's that's where I open files and how I save files, is that my Z drive here equates back to my documents, projects folder. And we can see that those are the same. So that is the virtual machine overview.